All right, as everybody's being brought in, thanks for joining us this evening for the next installment in our Vibrant Integrative Educational Webinar Series. And I am super excited for this one tonight. We have an amazing speaker, Dr. Ruan. You're going to learn all about him. He's going to tell you who he is, but I'm particularly excited for this topic. I think that you guys will also be excited. This is going to be a new test that Vibrant's going to be offering in the upcoming future. So we'll talk a little bit about that and what it's going to include. But again, thanks for joining us this evening. And Dr. Ruan, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and you can kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're going to talk about tonight.
Great, thanks a lot. I appreciate it, and I hope everyone can hear me. I think I am more excited about this than anyone else because I've been asking Vibrant to come out with something like this for about a year and a half now, and now it's coming into fruition. But it's really about environmental toxins. So for those of you who are just joining in, my name is Cheng. I was born in China, I came to the US, and grew up around my father, who's an MD PhD and world-leading researcher in terms of inflammation and oncology at medical center. And my mom is an acupuncture and herbalist, so really had an integrative type of mentality growing up, and did my residency and training in New York City, and I came back to Houston and I got board certified in internal medicine, and ultimately started Texas Center for Lifestyle Medicine, which is a functional and integrative health practice. So everything that's revolved around integrative health truly is involved around toxicities in general. And so first, I'm going to go into why we care about toxicities, to what are the clinical implications in learning about toxicities and who we should really be screening. And three, some of the organs that are really affected by these toxicities. And then I'll kind of bring out what Vibrant has to offer. So without further ado, I'm just going to get started. All right, so this is a quiz that we're going to have at the end. Everyone has to memorize this in 30 seconds. Just kidding, you don't really have to do that because I don't even know it, but I know I'm a big picture kind of guy, so I really want to walk through this with you guys, because if you know this chart or graph technically, then you kind of know the entire human body. So this is what we call the human metabolism map. And in the human metabolism map, you have different components. So if you look at the top of the page, you see carbs, carbohydrates, and then to the right of that, you see lipids or fats. And then to the left on the y-axis, you see DNA and RNA. And then further down, you see proteins. So carbs and fats and proteins are typically called the macros or macromolecules, and DNA and RNA, which technically to me should be the fourth macromolecule, but we'll just call it genetic material that we eat. And all these things enter different molecular pathways, and each of these pathways have enzymes and substrates that are encoded by genomes. And so when we eat carbs and fats and proteins and genetic material, the name of the game is to get it into the mitochondria so we can generate energy. And energy is ATP, and every time you spin the Krebs cycle around, and the Krebs cycle is this thing that's in the middle right here. And so it's kind of like Iron Man. So imagine if our body's like Iron Man, then that's the thing that's in the middle of Iron Man's chest, and that's the Krebs cycle. Okay, and it's also called a citric acid cycle. So the name of the game is to stuff your mitochondria and generate this ATP. If this cycle slows down, we develop disease, and we develop disorders, and we develop physical signs and symptoms of mitochondrial damage. So fatigue, libido issues, depression, anxiety, memory loss. You have palpitations, arrhythmias, cholesterol issues, cancer, autoimmune disease. So the mitochondria mitochondrial function is the root of most diseases that we know of. And so the idea is that we want to power our mitochondria. We want to get these components, these macromolecules into energy production, either through the Krebs cycle or through a couple other pathways. So basically, I want to make my suit as strong as possible. So I have to get this thing in the center of my chest to glow as much as possible, so I can fly and kick bad guys' butts. And so, in order to do that, we have to understand what disease really is so we can maybe reverse it, right? So, people who tend to have depression, anxiety, it's in that circle because that is the neurotransmitter activation circle, where you have activation of 5-hydroxytryptophan, which is serotonin, and then which makes you happy, and then turns into melatonin, which makes you sleepy. Then you have the fatigue and libido circle right here. Those are hormone metabolic map that's right here. So the hormones in your body are made from cholesterol, and cholesterol turns into those different components. And hormone balance is based on the sensitivity and the production of these hormones. So when you're off balance, you have fatigue and libido. And anytime that you see the circles interact, that means that's where that's the biochemical reactions affecting each stage. So if you look at the very top of the orange, you'll see acetyl-CoA entering into the Krebs cycle, and those giant arrows coming from the hormonal cycles. So your hormones obviously drive the mitochondria, and your neurotransmitter balance also helps drive the mitochondria as well. And then you can get memory loss and mentation and cognition issues and mood issues. So this is a big blue circle that's right here. By the way, the bigger the circle, the worse the prognosis of the disease. So for example, Alzheimer's and Parkinsonism and Lewy body dementia, it's all really in this circle that's right here. And once again, wherever you see the intersection means that there's a relationship that's there between each of the pathways. And then as the Krebs cycle slows down, you burn less energy per second, and then you develop metabolic syndrome. You get diabetes and prediabetes and blood pressure issues. And then you also get cholesterol issues, heart disease, stroke, atherosclerosis with impaired lipid breakdown or fat breakdown. And then ultimately, you get cancer, immune deficiencies, or even autoimmune disease. So these diseases don't necessarily happen in that order, but all the circles sort of intersect. So your entire body is connected through these different circular mechanisms. Now, in order for your body to be in balance, all of these different systems have to work together. And there's one universal entity that can inhibit all the systems at once, and we call those toxins. Okay, so the definition of toxins are things that exist in our body that can inhibit any of our metabolic cycles to inhibit the mitochondrial drive. So that's what toxins are. Okay, but there's two main toxins I want to get into in a second. The first type of toxin are the toxins which you can detect in labs, like using the Vibrant America technology. So looking at byproducts of benzenes and styrenes and all that. And then you have heavy metal toxins, and you have toxicity that are non-metals and organophosphates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the toxins that you can detect. That's one type of toxins. I call them physical toxins. The other type of toxins I call energy toxins, basically meaning toxic thoughts, expectations that are not met, self-blame, toxic relationships. Those affect the mitochondrial cycle just as much as the physical toxins. Okay, so today we don't have enough time to talk about that type of toxins. We're going to focus on the physical toxins because we can actually see it in the lab work. Okay, and so, but this is humans with disease. And it can become a toxic soup. So what happens is people get on medications. So they get on antidepressants and benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, and methamphetamines, depending on if it's depression, anxiety, or delusion disorder, or ADHD. So those are the most common medications for the emotional cycle, and people get on progestins and oral contraceptives and steroids, which affect hormonal cycles. And people get on, Alzheimer's disease medicines like those, and then people can get on diabetes medications and statins and fibrates and chemo and methotrexate. The problem with just looking at medications is that these medications were really designed to affect just one portion of that circle. But we really need to look at, if we want to look at the root cause of the disease, what is the overarching connection that's between all the circles? And that's exactly what toxins are. While medicines are okay for sort of temporizing measures, ultimately, I believe that we want to do what's best for our patients and really get to the root cause. We really have to look at that. So, if you want to be able to heal your brain and heal the hormones and heal your metabolic cycles and detoxifications and energies and genetics and inflammation, we really need to focus on the concept of detoxification, because if toxins really affect the entire map, then we really need to have an idea of what detoxification really means. But detoxification has really been sort of like this black box bucket, if you will, unknown. There's not really a standardized approach. Well, to have a standardized approach, you need to have a standardized way of looking at toxicity, right? And so that's why I'm so excited about what Vibrant has to offer in this test, because now we have a way of looking very, very accurately at these specific toxicities using a very proprietary tool, very proprietary technology that Vibrant has to offer, which makes me truly excited in practicing medicine in the current. So let's talk about some toxic exposures. So what exactly are the toxic exposures? So you have gasoline, you have byproducts of petroleum engineering. I'm in Houston, Texas, so we have a lot of petroleum engineering plants and companies here. So we have a lot of that stuff, especially after, we had a huge flood here in Hurricane Harvey, which my house got flooded. A lot of those byproducts went much deeper into our soils and saturated. And the plants that are grown in the soils are really deprived of minerals that are displaced by some of these environmental toxins. But now a lot of these toxins can be detected, and we want to, especially in a lot of disease states, like memory issues or cancers and all the stuff I'm about to get into. And then you have paints. Paints have volatile organic chemicals, or VOCs. And the volatility is because of the molecular structure of the molecule that comes out. And because of the molecular structure, we're able to inhale it. It can go through our skin, and it can deposit in our fatty tissue. And it really depends on how well the liver can detox so that it doesn't end up into our tissue or circulation. What gets me a little crazy about painting is so my wife is an OBGYN, and she sees obviously a lot of pregnant people. And one of the things that pregnant women love to do is paint the nursery or exist in the house where someone else is painting the nursery and they're smelling all those VOCs in there. Well, those VOCs can be actually detected, and it can go into the umbilical cord and go into the baby as well. So if you're pregnant or know anyone who's pregnant, please tell them not to be exposed to these paints. Pesticides. So pesticides are nothing new. We know that they're here. In the U.S., U.S. allows a lot more pesticides than a lot of different other areas in the world. And Europe doesn't even allow any pesticides to be sprayed unless it has standardizations. So what's interesting about pesticides in the U.S. is that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, stated that there's actually no safe level of some of these pesticides like glyphosate, which is something that you can test in the urine as well. But even though there's no safe level, safe levels are still being permitted in the US. So it's a little bit of a contradictory advice here from the United States government. And then you have exhaust fumes like this. Bonus points for people who know what car that is. It's a very distinctive American muscle car. You have exhaust fumes. You have plastics and food packaging that are there as well. And so if you look at this picture, it's a very familiar sight of a iced coffee that's in these plastics. So you have bisphenol A, which is a huge hormonal disruptor, a major contributor to breast and prostate cancer that's there. And so all these toxic exposures, there are very few tests to really know what your toxicity load is. But good thing that Vibrant is coming out with this one pretty soon. So once again, very, very excited. But these are just some of the toxic exposures. There's a whole lot more, but these are some of the main ones that people are generally exposed to that can have a serious impact on their health. All right, so launching December 1st, 2019, or if you're watching this on replay and it's past December, I guess you have it now. These are the components that are being tested for. So I'm not going to go into every single one of these because that'll be on a separate webinar. But what I will tell you is that a lot of these are what we're looking for. And traditionally, it's been really hard to detect this in urine due to technological limitations, but Vibrant has recently overcome that, thankfully. All right, so more importantly is who do we screen for these toxins? So people with migraines and seizures and fatty liver disease, biliary disease, autoimmune disease, kidney disease, obesity, insomnia, unexplained memory loss, tremors, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis. So these are some of the people that should be screened for toxins. And if you look at this list, it's sort of an extensive list. And ideally, I think most people with any chronic disease should really be screening for toxins. And so some of the buzzwords that you may hear is I've been on, this diet and this diet and this diet, vegan or paleo or vegan, whichever one it is. I can't seem to lose weight. The fat cells may be sequestering some toxicities that are in there. So it's really worthwhile to look at what toxicity exists. There are other people who have symptoms of what's called dysautonomia, where they have a really hard time, switching from their sympathetic response to parasympathetic response and back, and we call this dysautonomia. And this usually occurs within, September, October, when the weather gets colder and there's less daylight. Everyone with dysautonomia has some sort of environmental toxins that we have found. And those people with really chronic diseases who really wants to get off medication, the people with mental health issues and neurological issues, they may be harboring a lot of toxins. And so, if you're hunting for toxins, you'll find them. And the name of the game is detoxification, to lift up the inhibition of the mitochondria. So basically, you want a power Iron Man suit with the thing that glows in the middle of his chest, which is called a Tesseract. And then a lot of these toxicities disrupt hormones. It does that in many ways. So a lot of the most of these toxicities, especially with hydrocarbons and aromatics that you inhale, a lot of these toxicities like to go into the fat cells and like to deposit in fatty tissue, like tissues of the organ, the mesenteric fat, belly fat, and it causes this cortisol to cortisone shift, and then you have massive hormonal disruptions, and so you become hormonal resistant. And so a lot of these toxicities, because you become hormonal resistant, a lot of these hormones can get into levels where they may be promoting what's called genotoxicity, or toxicity on the genes, which basically is a cancerous state. And of course, that's not what we want. So one of the most sensitive things that we look at are labs looking specifically at the blood counts. And if find someone with either low white counts of any of the cell lines, lymphocytes, neutrophils, etc. Find people with high MCVs. So generally MCV is above 90. And then megaloblasts, schistocytes, and even thrombocytopenia. So these are kind of buzzwords for something is going metabolically wrong in the blood cells that's causing some issues, right? And so these could be environmental toxicities. So, a lot of times we think, oh, if you have a high MCV, you got and have some hypersegmented polys. We think maybe you have either B12 or folate issues, either B12 folate activation or B12 folate deficiency. It's usually one of the two. And so, but it goes far beyond that. It's far more than just B12 and folate and methylation. It is what is the original toxin that's really, causing this issue. And if people are taking B12 or people are taking the folate and their homocysteine is not coming down, and they still exhibit symptoms of fatigue. So the question is, what toxin is really left? And these are the people who you really should think about getting environmental testing done, because honestly, you just don't know sometimes. And then the liver, we call it the master filter. So when the liver gets a little damaged, the liver can become fatty, but the liver is your master detoxification agent. So whenever you inhale something, whenever you consume something, and if it's lipophilic, which most toxins are, it goes into the liver. And the liver can process it in different ways. There's three main phases of detox reactions. But when the liver's job is to recognize the toxins, neutralize the toxins, and then excrete the toxins either through the bile or conjugate the toxins so it can be hydrophilic and excrete through the kidney. So the liver kind of controls all that. Now, earlier I said that you can have hormonal destruction with the toxins. Well, the liver also metabolizes hormones like estrogen and then can aromatize testosterone into diol, processes progesterone and DHEA. And so if the liver has a high toxic load, the efficiency of the metabolizing these hormones can be impaired, also causing further hormonal imbalance. So the liver is really where it's at in terms of getting things back where we want it. So hepatotoxicity, that's a really, really common thing. Everyone has some sort of damage to the liver on a daily basis because we kind of live in a toxic world. But the liver is the only organ that goes under hyperplasia, which means that it can regenerate itself. So hypertrophy basically is enlargement of the organ, but the liver can go under hyperplasia, which means if you cut off the liver, it can grow back because it can divide cells. So that's how important the liver is, and our body is an amazing tool. But when we do see people with toxicity issues, we see them having fatty liver disease. And then when they go through a period of detoxification, it really doesn't take long before that fatty liver disease can be improved or even resolved. And that's how we know the toxicities are improved as well. So typical symptoms of toxicities: abdominal pain, bloating, diarrhea, increased gas, itching, jaundice, and abnormal stool colors. So some of the things that we look for is biliary backup, if you will. So the liver produces bile, the gallbladder stores the bile, and able to eject the bile into the duodenum, and then it's able to emulsify fats and bind to toxins that are in the duodenum. And so it's sort of an amazing mechanism that occurs because the bile is the most underrated detox mechanism that I know of. Because the bile is able to bind to mold toxins and mycotoxins, able to bind to heavy metals and all these different things that cause major fatigue and mitochondrial damage and metabolic issues. And so looking at the bile is one of the first steps that we really look at. So if people have elevations, any elevations of GGT, elevations of bilirubin, and some people have hereditary elevations of bilirubin called Gilbert syndrome, which can actually predispose them to increasing toxin accumulation. LDH is also LDH and ALK-Phos or ALP is also part of the biliary tract. It can be elevated when you have bile backup. And then ALT and AST, which is part of the parenchyma of the liver. So whenever you see a very general ALT to AST of 2 to 1, even though it's not elevated, you really do need to suspect fatty liver disease. I would get a rapid quadrant sono on these people to take a look to see if they truly have fatty liver disease. And then if they do, you really want to think about getting some environmental toxin testing. Generally, they will test positive, and then you now have something to target for detoxification. That's very tangible. All right, the kidneys. The kidneys are fun because the kidneys excrete toxins and metal toxins as long as the kidneys are perfused and the vessels are dilated. So, once again, the liver really controls what goes through the bile in the bowel and what goes through the kidneys due to a process called conjugation. So once the toxins are processed, the liver decides kind of what to do. So the kidneys are master filters, just like the liver is. And so if you have nephrotoxicity or kidney toxicity, you can have decreased urine production or really darkening of the urine. Edema, which basically means swelling, fatigue, elevated creatinines in the blood work, or abnormal cystatin C. Now, with the kidneys, most people will look for some of these blood work to see if there's any kidney toxicity. But I will tell you that the symptoms of a nephro or kidney toxicity occurs far before the blood work will show. And so, one of the ways that we know is that if people are starting to develop kind of poofiness under their eyes, and darkening circles under their eyes, they're probably actively trying to excrete toxins at that time. So the histamine's upregulated, and then they can have joint pains and swelling in their fingers. So these things generally happen before we see any changes in the actual blood work. Really got to keep an eye on people for kidney disease. But if the patient has this existing kidney disease or kidney disease that you found on blood work, please check for environmental toxins. I will give you some examples. There are bisphenol A's associated with deposition in the kidney, causing some specific glomerulonephritis physiology. You have parabens that's been able to be shown to be a very nephrotoxic. And there's all these other components that are there that a lot of times people can go to the kidney specialist and get diagnosed with a disorder. And if it's rheumatologic in origin, they get on these medicines. But once again, it's up to us to figure out the root cause of these disorders, and looking for these toxins that can cause kidney damage is absolutely crucial. But I would recommend always check with a nephrologist for differential diagnosis, because nephrologists can, if need be, they can do kidney biopsies to look for glomerulonephritis or tubular necrosis. And all these things are actually very important to do to establish that diagnosis. And of course, prescribe lifestyle changes. And lifestyle changes are so powerful in detoxification. Because lifestyle changes can really reverse a lot of chronic disease once it's done right. Which lifestyle changes? Well, I do recommend working with functional nutritionists with training in kidney disease to have some expertise in this to have the patients follow them. And so these are my general tips for the kidney disease. Moving on to the brain, this is my favorite organ because the brain has the highest concentration of mitochondria or energy subunits. So whenever there's something wrong, the brain is the first to know. And if you ever experience food coma, you know what I'm talking about. So food coma or Thanksgiving syndrome is when you eat food that's either inflammatory or eating too fast, and you're like, I just want to lay down and take a nap. Okay. That's cytokines causing a napalm strike attack on the small bowel. And you have all these acute phase reactants cross-reacting with Purkinje fibers and glial cells that's in the brain. And then you have receptors like toll-like receptor 4 that activates in the gut and the brain that decreases the pH of the brain, causing a narcotics like physiology. So that narcosis, we call it, is basically food coma. And the brain can tell you, is also the first to tell you about toxicities. And you just have to listen to yourself. So there's a few things that we do in our practice. We do a fair amount of quantitative EEG testing. We do a lot of ultrasound, especially looking at arterial ultrasounds and CIMTs, MRIs. We do PET-CTs. And these diagnostic imaging just gives us a bigger clue into sort of mitochondrial dysfunction. So anybody with any sort of chronic neurological symptoms, memory loss, fatigue, dementia, Parkinsonism, multiple sclerosis, whichever one it is, we're usually able to find some toxicity that exists. The brain is full of fatty tissue, which means that most toxins are lipophilic, and a lot of them can cross the blood-brain barrier. And so whenever we're seeing these people with chronic neurological issues, or even people who are, chronic alcoholics or obese, we're actually seeing patterns of toxicity. And so, and this is something to get ahead of, because once different areas of the brain gets damaged, a lot of times there's no turning back. And these toxins that we look for in the body also cause something called priming syndrome. And what it is that your brain has a very, very robust immune system. And these glial cells in the immune system have a mechanism called priming. So if the mechanism is primed, it will remain primed forever. What is it primed for? It's primed for inflammation. This is why when people like myself, where I used to play football, and I get knocked in the head, and after my 8th or 9th concussion, it's really easy for me to get a concussion, because the brain is primed for that traumatic assault on the brain, causing a massive inflammatory cascade to occur, which causes a major chronic neurological issues, can lead to Parkinsonism and memory loss, and even mood disorders. And so that's why I'm so adamant on looking at the brain. It is the first to tell us whether there's toxicity issues. And so whenever your brain is primed, traumatic brain injury can prime the brain, but more importantly, chronic toxicities can prime the brain just as much. And we call these microtraumas. Microtraumas can be caused by neurotoxins, and most of the toxins that are measured in this test are actually neurotoxins, because they can cross the blood-brain barrier. So more of these toxins and neurotoxins that you're around in your environment, you can cause a lot of brain neurologic damage and inflammatory priming mechanism that sequesters an area of the brain. So that's basically a really fancy way of saying you can develop Alzheimer's physiology by sequestering areas of the brain with something called amyloid plaque or beta amyloid. And so a lot of medications has been attempted to develop to decrease the amyloid, but every attempt has not resulted in a good clinical outcome, because the idea is to not take away the beta amyloid, but decrease the original toxicity to begin with. If you decrease the amyloid deposition, you can actually accelerate neurological damage. That's why most of the Alzheimer's medications and vaccines that were coming out didn't work, and that's why there's so few medications for it. But the idea is to decrease toxic load. Then you really have to look at the toxic burden. And so as we go through detox programs, as we change our lifestyle, we really have to have a good number to really look at to figure out what the toxicity load is, and that's exactly what Vibrant is providing. And so, but these are just some of the things that we do for the brain. So, as I said before, you can have central nervous system issues. So, a lot of the toxicities are misdiagnosed as mental health disorders, misdiagnosed as Alzheimer's disease or MCI or attention deficit disorder in kids. So whenever we see these chronic mental disorders, really have to figure out, what their profession is, where they've been, what's going on with them, figure out what toxins are actually showing up, and initiate them on a protocol to decrease their toxicity through lifestyle management. And then there's pesticides. Pesticides are highly neurotoxic. They are sprayed on crops and found in the soil, and very, very potent neurotoxins, and very, very potent mitochondrial inhibitors. And once again, the EPA states there's no safe level. They can be ingested, inhaled, and absorbed. So one of our groups, and we do group sessions in our practice, has a family that's from Omaha, Nebraska, who moved to Houston, Texas. And every time they go back, the entire family erupts with eczema. And whenever they're away from it, they don't have eczema. And they had a very, very high level of different types of organophosphate byproducts in their urine that we found. And so once we're able to reduce their toxic load, they can go back to Omaha without much of an issue. But the idea is to decrease or even eliminate the toxicity exposure as much as we can. And so that's how powerful we can address on time in terms of toxicity and decreasing toxic load. So what do you do if you suspect any toxins, not just brain toxins? Obviously, the patient has existing neurological disease. Please test it. I think it's a really important thing to do. And plus, when patients see that there's actually a toxic load that exists within them that may be contributing to their disorders, they're far more likely to initiate a detox or a lifestyle regimen. And so I like to make things a bit simple. And I like to have people start by eating what's called a phytonutrient spectrum, with special emphasis on the dark greens and purples, blue, reds, and anything that's cyan, with basically anthocyanin containing foods. So why the colors of the rainbow? Well, as we know, the colors of the rainbow basically is a way for humans to tell that there's specific micronutrients that allow the macromolecules to enter the Krebs cycle. So you can increase that Krebs cycle spinning, so you can make ATP or energy. Okay, that's one way. So humans have this, this trichromatic vision. Basically, humans are able to see a wide range of different colors from far distances. So we're able to go to a far distance and pick out, berries or or herbs or vegetables. So we kind of have this innate sense of eating the colors of the rainbow, which I think we've really gotten away from. And the other thing is that these phytonutrients that actually create the colors in these beautiful foods get broken down by your gut bacteria, and these proteins affect epigenetic expression pretty much instantaneously. So you're incorporating the DNA as well as the phytonutrients into your gut microbiome, which in turn changes your epigenetic expression of your gut and then the rest of the body. That's how powerful eating the phytonutrient spectrum is. So one of the most common questions that I get, because we have an autoimmune program and a cancer program in our facility, is which toxin do I have that's really causing genetic issues or genetic mutations, causing autoimmunity and causing cancers, okay? And then so a lot of people come in with a DNA analysis or SNP analysis. While we used to enjoy seeing those for genetic predisposition, these days it doesn't matter a whole lot whether they have methylation defects or MTRR, VDR, GSPST1. It doesn't matter what they really have. If they have epigenetic factors that are either creating on-off switches for these genes, then that's the one that really matters. And so we really gotten away from looking at genetic SNPs and really focus on, hey, what toxicities you actually have instead. And so when we look at these toxicities and we're able to decrease these toxicities, there's definitely clinical correlation with this, and that makes us really excited. And so, suspect environmental toxins in all non-hereditary cancers, which basically is 95% of cancers. All right. So, 95% of cancers are not purely hereditary. A lot of these have epigenetic factors. So the idea is to hunt for toxins. What we mean is you got to look for toxins in these people with cancer, and a lot of times we find these toxins. And sometimes, you'll find some toxins, and you can't necessarily find a direct correlation to the cancer. Well, that doesn't mean that this toxin is not causing cancer. What it means is that this person's immune system is not robust enough to clear all these toxins, and because of that, there's a high propensity of epigenetic signaling that can create a genotoxicity. Basically, it's not that particular toxin that's causing it. It may be that toxin is the indicator that the immune system is not functioning well enough to detox, so that the epigenome is really causing the issues with the cancer. And so the idea is to not link a toxin to a disease state. The idea is to decrease the toxic load, and everything will start getting better. And then we can correlate to clinical symptoms. So once again, correlation does not mean causation. And the idea is to not target a toxin to the disease state. The idea is to look at the toxicities overall, once again. And the detoxification is obviously is key to lifting toxicities of epigenetic signaling. So that's why we don't look at SNP analysis a whole lot anymore in the practice. We really look at what's the epigenetic factors that's really going on in our patients. So once again, it's kind of a big list, and in this list, there's a lot of different components of toxicities in here, and these will be kind of addressed on a separate webinar. But just to name a few, we look a lot at byproducts of styrene, and glycine is a big one for neurotoxins, and parabens and methylparaben. Bisphenol A is huge because there's already major publications for that and prostate, as well as hormone-positive breast cancers. And there is, of course, glyphosate on the list as well, which is the active ingredient in weed killers. And then there's MEPS and DEPS, monoethyl phthalates and diethyl phosphates, and these exist in a lot of industrial products as well. So even though it's a big list, it's not one of those tests that I really look at exactly, hey, what's causing what. If people are showing up a lot of these toxins or really at really high levels, and then we can correlate that with saying that their toxicity load is quite a bit, and we want to be able to decrease the toxicity loads. So it's kind of like we're all born with this finite space, this bucket, if you will, of that we can fill up our toxins in. And once the bucket overflows, then all these different diseases show up, and mitochondrial dysfunction show up. And so the idea is to not just not fill the bucket, but empty the bucket out through mechanisms of detoxification. So once again, a lot of these are just looking at the toxicity load. Now we're going to get a little bit technical. And so basically the way that we look at these toxins is through mass spectrometry. So with mass spec, it's pretty common that a lot of labs have mass spec. But what's interesting is when you get to a lot of these toxins, the properties of the toxins are so similar that a lot of times you can't really analyze what's what. And so Vibrant has a very unique way of doing this using a specific technology. And these technologies are really accurate and highly reproducible. So no one really has this. And part of the reason why it took so long to develop this test, because this is very proprietary, and I've been waiting for it for a very long time. So I'm very happy. And this second slide is just looking at how this is really done. So basically, there's a mass spec that is loaded onto this software, and there are certain things that the software does to allow an extrapolation of a mathematical data to look at very, very specific toxins that are in this list. And no one's able to really reproduce this, at this time. And so, very impressive technology. Far too complicated for me to get into fully, but it's certainly something that's truly exciting to me. And so, I'm going to just end my portion of this with a little bit of a recap of one thing that's back here. Okay. So looking at this graph and knowing the toxicities and toxins cause a lot of these issues to happen, I want to focus on the different colors in the circles. So the colors in the colors of the circles actually correlate to the color of phytonutrients that we should be eating. So it's not, hey, let's eat blue for inflammation. The idea is let's get all the colors of the rainbows in, so that we're able to affect our epigenetics as robust as possible, to get our energy producing units to produce as much energy as possible, to try to attempt to reverse this chronic disease. And we do that, and the more we are focusing on getting the phytonutrients in, the more we can demonstrate that there's a detoxification effect on the body. And now there's a very, very good way to look at it through Vibrant, which I'm truly excited about, of decreasing that toxic load. Now, another thing I do want to warn people is that whenever people are changing their lifestyles, they're eating well, initially their toxins in their urine can actually increase because they're increasing the excretion in the urine. And so, and a lot of times if that happens, don't be surprised. But I just congratulate people. Congratulations, excreting more toxins. And over time, if you test it again, you can see that curve going right back down. I wish I can tell you the time frame that happens, but it's so different for everyone. There's not really a whole lot of consistency. But when you do this test, know that whenever people are doing the detox programs, eating the colors of the rainbow, practicing mindfulness meditation, if you do see that their toxins are increased on excretion, that may be a good thing. I would check it again later to see when that actually goes down. But it's not a discouraging thing for a lot of the patients, or shouldn't be discouraging as long as you tell them. Some people do kind of freak out when they see that toxicity load is a little bit higher. And so generally in my practice, we don't really check before 3 months. But generally at a 3-month mark, most people have a really decreased toxicity load that you can check for. But some people want to check earlier to map out their toxic load, and that's totally fine. We just got to let people know that, hey, initially, maybe we check a week later or even a month later, that the toxins can actually increase. But then if you do it again and again and map it out, it can decrease over time. And that's something really important for people to sort of understand as well. So, having said that, going back, I'm going to end this on this slide. This is the actual toxins that we'll be launching on December 1st. So be really excited about it. And once again, the specific of these will be on another webinar. But this is sort of your introduction into why we should really be testing for environmental toxins.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Awesome. That was great, Dr. Ruan. That was like very informative. I think that, you kind of took a 30,000-foot view and then you brought it in and made it a little bit more specific as far as, some of the things that people need to be looking at, So I think we have about 10 minutes for Q&A left. So if anybody has questions, you can go ahead and type them in. There's both a Q&A feature if you're logged in online or on the app, as well as there's a chat. Both of those will come through. as far as questions. I know that we had a couple that were emailed beforehand of people who weren't going to be able to make it. One of the questions was with some of the industrial pollutants. So I guess, bisphenol A is a good example. And some of your plastic residues, right? Things that result from plastic manufacturing. Is the, I guess, chelation, I don't know if chelation is the right word here, is the removal of those toxins from the body similar to the process of chelating heavy metals? Or is it more like there's not really a chelation agent? We're looking at like,
really
bioflavonoids and.
Yeah, really, really good question. You cannot chelate out lipophilic substances like bisphenol A and all. In fact, if you do try to, it can actually make people quite sick. So those people who, and this, you know what, I should address this, and I'm glad this question was asked. If people are looking for heavy metals and you find heavy metals, but you don't look for other non-metal toxins, you kind of get into a little bit of trouble. And it's because these non-metal toxins in this environmental toxin panel are the ones that have far bigger implications on the liver's detoxification. And so people are trying to chelate out heavy metals with a high environmental toxin load. A lot of them can get quite sick and can't tolerate it very well, especially if they're using oral chelating agents. IV not as much. And so we don't even look at heavy metal toxins. We look at them. We don't chelate them, and we don't necessarily deal with them until we deal with these non-metal toxins. So I guess the question is, well, how do you really deal with these non-metal toxins? Well, first, if you're finding this bisphenol A, if you're finding these different things, are they going to Starbucks? If they're going to Starbucks, are they drinking from the Starbucks mug, or are they bringing their own, stainless steel one that the Starbucks can fill up, right? Or if they're using paraben films as food storage, or we had a bodybuilder who was meal prepping in these massive containers that he got from eBay of who knows what's in that stuff. But there was massive amounts of bisphenol A that was inhibiting his testosterone excretion. Right? These are lifestyle habits to really consider for these people. And so that's decreasing the toxicity. And then there's increasing the body's detoxification mechanisms, which the most important thing to do is to make sure all phytonutrients come into your body, the colors of the rainbow. And the colors of the rainbow are basically nature's way of telling us there are micronutrients that exist within this particular food that allows a healing process, a detoxification process. Well, if you look at all ancient cultures, if you look at all religions, what colors are the other superfoods that are in there? You have dates and grapes, and you have currants and all these different things. So these are all what we call blue hue foods. And so anything that's really blue or purple or bluish or red, dark red, and these are the foods that are considered superfoods in all ancient religions and all ancient cultures, because these are what we call detoxification foods. We now know that anthocyanin and other phytonutrients are metabolized by the gut microbiome for that detoxification purpose. And so lifestyle is really the first thing to kind of get in there, well before you try to do any of the chelations or anything like that, for if you find heavy metals kind of within them.
Great. One question that you actually just, as you were talking, kind of reminded me when you mentioned heavy metals and individuals testing and chelating for that. Oftentimes, if someone has a leaky blood-brain barrier, chelation of heavy metals can actually be a little too, aggressive, and those heavy metals that are being pulled out of tissue can actually get into the brain. Do you find the same with, like, all of a sudden removal of some of these toxins, if all of a sudden, like, adipocytes are releasing them, right, if they're fat soluble? Would somebody potentially feel worse temporarily if they were excreting more toxins?
So this is kind of a controversial topic, and I am from a camp of that if people are trying to change their diet, change their lifestyle, detoxify from the body, that sort of detox reaction, which traditionally has been called the Herxheimer reaction, can exist. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, personally, from a biochemical point of view, and that's my background, um, you really can't do that and have that effect immediately. What I mean is that if you start changing your lifestyle, if you start changing your diet, eating the colors of the rainbow, mindfulness, meditation, the first thing that happens is that your insulin level drops. When your insulin level drops, what's happening is that your insulin normally tells your kidneys to reabsorb all the sodium that you're filtering out. So you start doing what's called a sodium dumping. And when you sodium dump, you almost feel like you have low blood sugar. You feel like you have these flu-like symptoms, and you feel like it's kind of like that, like, oh wow, I don't feel very good at all. Drink some water, you can get a little better. And then some people take bicarb tablets and they feel better, and that's because they're actually taking in sodium bicarbonate. They can easily take in table salt and sodium chloride or Himalayan sea salt and feel just as good. So we have found that a lot of these detox effects are not necessarily from the toxins, but they're actually more from electrolyte shifts, from depletion of sodium and sodium dumping phenomenon, and dysregulation of dysregulation of neural cell membranes from the sodium dumping phenomenon. Those can be really easily fixed with taking in some sodium through sodium bicarb. That's why people like to drink alkaline water after when they go through detox reaction, because I think there's a misconception that the bicarbonate is actually helping. It's actually the sodium that they're taking in that's actually helping a whole lot more. That phenomenon occurs really, really fast, while Herxheimer reactions is a completely different arm of the immune system that does take some time to really gear up. But you can actually quantify a Herxheimer reaction from looking at different complement cascades. But those labs are generally too expensive for us to do anyways. But I do want to let people know that if people are trying to detox, have them drink some salt water is not a bad idea, especially if they're going gluten-free, dairy-free, non-GMO, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But getting the salt content up is a very good idea.
Good. That's great advice. There's one question. Inositol S2-cyanoethyl L-cysteine is on the list. Is this different from the N-acetylcysteine supplement?
Oh yeah, it
sounds like probably.
Different. Yeah, it's not even in the same category. So that's one's a toxin and one's a detox agent. So yeah.
Awesome. All right. Let's see.
Yeah, I can't see the questions. So you might have to read it to me.
Oh, really? I thought they were available. That was really the last one. Unless there was any additional questions, you can always email us as well. Yeah, there was a couple of just lab-related questions. There is one. What about the other bisphenols?
What about it?
Are there other? Well, I guess maybe. So we are testing for bisphenol A. Do you find that the other bisphenols are something that's a concern?
Well, I think testing for bisphenol A and all the other components, I think this is more than enough to be like a really good litmus paper into seeing how people detoxify. I think we can go kind of crazy, like looking other components a little too deeply. But consider this like, what the patient's detoxification mechanism is. And I don't know, there might be some technological limitations looking at other bisphenols that I don't know about. But just from a practicality, like practitioner standpoint, I think, you have so many elements in here that can let me know how the patient's doing in terms of detoxification. I think it's very valuable.
Okay, great. So basically it stands to reason that if they have elevated levels of bisphenol A, they might also have elevated levels of other bisphenols, but you're not necessarily going to approach it any differently if it's one versus the other.
Right, that's correct.
Okay. Awesome. All right, well, we are at time. We got to wrap it up. Dr. Ruan, thank you so much for your time tonight. That was incredible. I'm really pumped for this test. Again, this does launch December 1st, and we do not yet have pricing information. We will have that out, shortly before the test launches. And your local territory reps if you're a provider listening in, will also have that information once it becomes available. We, of course, if you're familiar with Vibrant, we like to bundle tests. We like to create value for you. So that's what we're waiting on right now is basically coming up with the most clinically relevant test bundles for you as far as testing for environmental toxins. So with that, I hope everybody has a great night. Dr. Ruan, thank you so much for your time again.
Thank you.
We'd love to hear from, a lot more about this from you in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.